Hi, everybody. My name is Judy Weinstock. I'm an attorney at Parles Reckham Law Firm. We specialize in representing families with children with special needs and adults with special needs in their families. Today, Denise Reckham, who is the named partner and founding member of the firm, is with me, and we're going to discuss with you navigating the IEP process, what to include in an effective IEP. I should also mention that this is part of a longer range of different webinar programs that we're presenting, and to please check our website, which will be at the end of the slide presentation, to find out what's coming up in the next couple of weeks and the next couple of months as far as future programming. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us. We find that when we represent clients and we talk to and do other webinars and presentations, that there's a lot of questions surrounding the IEP and how parents can advocate on their own to develop with the school IEP teams to make an effective IEP so that their children can make progress. So we're going to start out quickly with just the basic information about the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, which was passed in 2004. And just to kind of go over briefly what the background is, and what Congress intended to do with the IDEA. So it says it right here, the purpose of this title or the statute is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education, otherwise known as FAPE in the biz, that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So, key terms: free, appropriate public education. That's what children and individuals with disabilities are guaranteed. We want to emphasize that when they're classified and designated a child with a disability, then we're emphasizing what kind of special education and related services the individual child needs to prepare them to become as independent as possible, as they're capable of becoming, for further education, employment, and just independent living. So the mandate entitles all who meet the definition of a child with a disability receives, like I said, a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE. And this is another important characteristic of the statute, is that it's in the least restrictive environment, or LRE. You probably all are pretty familiar with this. So what's really important is that the school, under this statute, is obligated, they're required to evaluate children in all areas of suspected weakness. They're actually obligated under the statute with what's called a child find obligation. So schools are required to pick up and observe and see whether certain children may be suspect of having disabilities and may need some special instruction, intervention, or accommodations to address those disabilities or those challenges. So this is kind of separate, but it's called a child find obligation. And once they identify a child who may have a disability, they're required to evaluate that child in all the areas of their suspected weakness. Now, parents can also refer, if they're observing that their child is struggling in areas, that they have certain challenges that they want the school to address, they can also, in writing, request the school to refer the child to a child study team for this assessment, for these evaluations. So just to go over a little bit, these evaluations are conducted by the district, the school district, in the areas of suspected weakness. There's an initial evaluation, which is when the child is initially referred to the child study team, and they do a comprehensive evaluation with specific assessments to address specific suspected weaknesses or challenges. But there's also what's called the triennial evaluation, and the triennial evaluation is what happens every 3 years after your child has been identified and classified as a child with a disability and has been already provided an IEP. The evaluation drives the IEP. It's the assessment of the child to make sure, to see where all the weaknesses, the challenges are, the suspected challenges, and to hone in on that. And that's what's going to be addressed in the IEP. If you start off with a poor evaluation, you basically have a poor IEP. So it's really important. Now, school districts perform these evaluations. They're required to once there's a once there's a child with a suspected disability. But there's also independent evaluations that can be completed. And there's two different types. One is an independent evaluation at the school district's expense. And this is made after the school has conducted their own evaluation and the parent requests in writing that independent evaluations take place at the school district's expense. But there's also another type of independent evaluation, and that is just basically a private independent evaluation that's at the parent or the guardian's expense. When parents go out on their own and they hire or retain their own treating professionals to conduct an evaluation of their child independently. And those evaluations can be submitted to the child study team, and they must be considered. They don't always have to adopt what the recommendations are of the independent evaluation, but the assessment must be considered, and they have to address in writing the concerns and the recommendations that the private independent evaluator raises in that report. We tend to recommend that parents do get their own evaluators because then they have a relationship with that person who's assessing their child, and they get to see the report first, and they can discuss what they've seen, the weaknesses, the strengths, and discuss it in more detail. Whereas if it's a contractor by the school with the school, then the contractor sends the evaluation first to the school, and they are the ones that sort of have that free-flowing conversation between them. But the parent doesn't get to see that contracted evaluation until the school presents it to the parent. So the development of an individualized education plan, that's what we're here really to talk about. The IEP, which is fundamental in addressing your child's needs, basically. And it's a roadmap to your child's education. It contains the following, which we'll go into greater detail in later slides. But the first thing that it contains is your child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, or PLAFs. And this is what we're looking at when we look at evaluations. So it's an assessment, the evaluations of how your child is doing. And it also includes their strengths as well as their weaknesses. The second part of the IEP is that it's very important to have what's called measurable annual goals and short-term objectives, and then to address weaknesses and strengths. And then we have transition goals and services. We have placement determination and statement regarding any deviation from the least restrictive environment. So basically what the program is going to be, what the special intervention, the special instruction will be, and the placement of the child, and the related services to be received, whether it's speech language, occupational therapy, PT, whether we need some kind of special transportation to get the child to and from school. And then lastly, there's accommodations and modifications to the general curriculum and extracurricular activities. And we'll go into that again in later slides. So who develops the IEP? This is a very important part of the law. The IEP team, and it is just that, a team, is made up of not only members from the district staff, but most importantly, you are members of the IEP team, and you're an important member as part of developing an appropriate IEP for your child. The child is also a member where it's appropriate. That's usually dependent upon age and cognitive ability and the ability of the child to engage. The case manager, which will be assigned after a child's identified and classified, at least one of the child's general education teachers, if that's relevant, and at least one member of the child study team that evaluated the child. So when they conduct all their evaluations, there'll be someone there that already had evaluated and knows your child. Certified school personnel who referred the child for the evaluation, other specialists if it's needed, like an OT or a PT, a therapist, a psychologist, and other individuals invited by the school or the parent who have knowledge of the child and can help the team. So if a parent has been sending their child to some social skills program after school, they can have the therapist who's been working with them come address the needs of the child during the IEP meeting. So just to get an idea, basic idea of understanding the steps. So the first thing is to identify the needs of the student, which is what the evaluation process is all about, which becomes the PLAFs. The second is to write the goals and objectives so that we can address the child's needs and so that they can make meaningful progress. And then the second part is to create the program so that what are we providing the child so that they can meet those goals and objectives. And then a decision on placement. What kind of least restrictive environment can the child make meaningful progress in? And the needs of a child includes, it's a very broad umbrella, educational progress, and what the statute covers. And it's not just academic, math, science, bio, whatever it might be, math, science, English. It's also behavioral, it's social emotional, and a whole purview of other skills that are necessary in order to develop and to become independent, which is the goal of the statute. So again, we like to have parents really focus on the big picture. It's really important during the IEP process, identifying the needs in the IEP, which is done with the PLAFs. What's their present levels? What do the assessments say? What are the recommendations as far as what the child's needs are? What's their disability? And then to write measurable annual goals. What goals are we setting forth that the child can achieve with the special instruction that's going to be provided, and how do we measure them? And describe the progress towards the annual goal and how it will be measured, which is what I just said. And then basically determine the schedule for reporting progress to the parent. So present levels of academic achievement of functional performance. This is the statute defining present levels, and sorry about that. And then it's very specific. It's the statement of their present levels, including how the child's disability impacts the child's involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. So it could be something like a social emotional disability or impediment that is interfering with that child's access to learning. That's just one example. It can be reading. It can be any one of many forms of disabilities and challenges that are interfering with the learning process. So basically, we want to advise parents and guardians to read the evaluations very carefully. So whether it's the evaluations from the school district, whether it's an independent evaluator that's been contracted with the school, or whether it's your own treating professional that has conducted an evaluation, it's very important to read the evaluations and go over it. It's complicated a lot, but just to kind of really decipher and get to understand what relative weaknesses your child might have, what strengths they might have, and put it all together. It's what provides parents and advocates and guardians to be better advocates for their children, to really thoroughly understand. And that includes the academic performance of the child, the functional performance of the child, and the generalizations of skills, like social skills across all environments. And again, this is the baseline of what we're starting off with, the present levels at the beginning of the IEP. And these are the areas of needs. There's some examples. So academic, reading, math, and writing. There's health concerns that might be infringing on a child's access to learning, mental health, gross and fine motor skills that interfere, sensory processing issues, social skills, behaviors, executive functioning. These are all areas of needs that are identified through the evaluation process and listed in the present levels of functional performance. Now, understanding your child's abilities and disabilities can go beyond just the evaluations. The evaluations are crucial, and really understanding them and going over them is very, very, very important. But it's also, your child, you observe your child at different times of the day. You also kind of see where your child's strengths and weaknesses lie, where your child excels. where their interests lie. What are they interested in? That could be a key to what their strengths are, what they are at ease doing. And if your child is diagnosed with a disability, reading books and articles written about your child's disability is really, really helpful. You'll get a lot of guidance as to how you can contribute to the conversation during the IEP meetings. Will be helped will though these kind of resources will really help you in guiding that conversation, and many times you learn different ways that your child's disability can be addressed, and that includes, lectures and workshops regarding your child's disability as well. What we find extremely helpful personally and with our parents is to network, both with local and national parent advocacy groups. It's very helpful if it's a group that pertains to your child's specific disability. There are Dyslexia Association parent groups. There are all sorts of different types of groups around that. Networking is so, and getting, obtaining the resources that these groups have is incredibly helpful in this whole process. And of course, networking with the parents in your local community to find out more about local service providers. It's also really helpful when parents talk to other parents about their experiences with the district and how they've been working with the child study team or the IEP team, and who different characters are in the process, like who's the director of special services, and you can get like a lot of insight from parents. I always say, you should put a little bit of a screening hat on when you're talking to other parents, because every child is different and every family is different and they have different needs. So their experiences may not be what your experience is going to be. And there may be a little bit of conflicting experience. Some people have very good experiences, some others don't. I think that what you're trying to get from the parents in your community is just a little bit of insight overall, a general understanding of how the IEP team, the district, is approaching children who have these disabilities. So, just a very important part of the IEP. There is a section, it's called the Parent Concerns section, and you're the author of this section. And we like to remind you that you're a key member of this team, and that your observations at home and at play with your child it's data. It's very important data that you can contribute and share with the IEP, that you should contribute and share with the IEP team, and that can be done in the Parent Concerns section. We advise that you provide the team with your concerns and with your observation and with this data prior to the meeting in writing. And we'll keep on emphasizing how everything needs to be in writing. And then, you can revise or update your concerns after you have the IEP meeting, again, in writing, and you can request that it be added to this section of the IEP, the parent concerns sections. Now, you can type up these concerns and submit it to the child study team or the case manager in the IEP team, or you can, and it can be typed into the IEP, or it can be attached separately to the IEP. But it's really important. This is sort of the law specifically designates parents as very much a key member of this IEP team. And like I said, in the IEP forms, there is a section for parent concerns. And this is your opportunity to share what you're seeing, what you are identifying as your child's struggles. And also, as you have IEPs, several IEPs in the future, you can also monitor their progress and comment on what you think are your child's strengths, but also if they're making progress, or in your observations, they don't seem to be making progress. So with that, I will hand it over to Denise.
Okay, hi everyone. So I'm going to shift now to talking about the annual measurable academic and or functional goals. So the IDEA, the federal law, says that there has to be a statement of measurable annual goals, including academic and functional goals that are designed to meet the child's needs that result from the child's disability, to enable the child to be involved in and make progress in the general education curriculum, and to meet each of the child's other educational needs that result from the disability. Next slide. So, we like to talk about the goals as really the roadmap for the services. The goals should drive the services. So if we say that this child with, for instance, dyslexia is at a certain level of reading, we want to say where we expect the child to be in a year, and then there'll be goal like objectives within that goal for say each quarter of a year, um, and those goals are then going to be driving what type of reading instruction the child needs in order to make those goals. So thinking through, looking at the deficits that are identified in the evaluations, and then making the goals, and the goals should be high expectations, not things like you're not going to say a child who's 3 years below reading level in 1 year is necessarily going to be able to be at grade level. But you also want the child who's 3 years below to be making consistently more than a year of progress in order to be closing the gap or catching up to their peers. So you want to make sure that the goals set, a high but attainable goal for the child, that if the services and supports being provided are working, that child should be able to make that goal. The goals should address the specific areas of need, um, while moving the child also towards independence with the skill. So it might be that the child's going to be able to do something with support, but as they, move on, the support can be faded. And, eventually, obviously, we want the children to do whatever they can do independently, because they're not going to be having, aides and, support people following them around for the rest of their lives. So you want to think also when you're looking at the goals, when it says with support, it's important to understand what that means, what support it is, how we know what support it is, how much support it is, and then to be able to fade that support. The goals should be observable and measurable. And I'm sure many of you have heard this SMART goals, but they should be specific, measurable, achievable. Oop. Okay, I'm not on the right. Okay, sorry. You're going the wrong direction, Judy. Keep going. One more. One more. Okay, stop. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And now we can go to the next slide. We're gonna look at sort of a formula. It doesn't have to be exactly like this, but I think it's very helpful sheet, and you can find this at this specialneedsdigest.com. The link is below. We didn't create this, but I think it's very helpful where you're saying that, you're gonna first you're gonna have a time frame, right? By when is this goal going to be achieved? What is the goal? What is the specific thing the child's going to be able to do? And in what setting or context are they going to be able to do it? Let's say it's a child with autism, right? We might first say that the child is going to be able to do something at school or, in the classroom. But then we're going to want to have the next goals being generalizing that goal, that the child's going to be able to do it in other locations, right? So there's lots of things to think about, and it really depends on the child's disability. How is this going to be measured? How is the progress going to be measured? And what's the accuracy? So again, like a lot of times you'll see 80%, you'll see that the child's going to do this goal at 80%. It depends on what the goal is. If the child is going to be able to safely cross the street, for example, we need that 100%. Because if you can't safely cross the street 100% of the time, you can't safely cross the street, because it's like Russian roulette. We're not going to let the child, be able to do that on their own if they don't do it consistently all the time with, looking both ways and everything. And then with what supports, and I mentioned before, it's perfectly acceptable depending on the child's disability for the goal to be that they can do something with the support. But we don't want to stop there. When they achieve the goal with support, we want to achieve it with reminders or with a schedule, or, more and more to be able to finally achieve it independently. So, it's just a very helpful way, this chart, to think through when you're looking at your goals. And if any of this information is missing in the goal, you can ask that it be added. I often see a lot of goals that say that someone is going to improve something. That is the most not measurable. Like, we all sort of improve just by living our lives, hopefully day by day, but I don't know what that means, improve. Like, improve how much, improve in what way? So you want to look at the goals in your IEPs, and think through, are they, first of all, targeting the right skills? Right? If a child has social deficits and say they're on the autism spectrum, and the goals in the IEP are all academic and not dealing with any of the social issues, then you're missing goals in certain areas. If the goals say improve, or, they're kind of hard for you to understand, like that, if they're going to then report to you on the goals and say the child's making progress, you need to understand what that even means. Like, how is progress being measured? So this is just a handy sort of cheat sheet. You can even take it to an IEP meeting, to try to help you look through your own goals and your own IEP to see, if they need to be rewritten so that they're addressing any of these areas. Next slide. Okay, so once we have the goals, right, then we can decide what services and supports the child needs in order to be able to achieve those goals, right? So this is the students' classes, programs, the related services, the things that the school district is going to provide in order to allow them to master the goals that we just developed. They need to define each program for the child. Is it an in-class resource, pull out, a resource room? Is it a specialized school? Whatever the services are. And I always try to advise parents to really dig into what exactly that means. What does that look like, right? Because I mean, we've found when we talk to parents, when they come to us, that sometimes what they thought the program was is not really what the program was. Like, there's a miscommunication. For instance, let's say the placement is pull out replacement for language arts, or pull out replacement for math. Well, if you see the word replacement means that your child is not getting the same curriculum in that classroom as the students that in the general ed classroom. So you need to ask questions about that. What does that mean? Now, a lot of times parents will say, no, they said it was the same curriculum, but if it was, it wouldn't say replacement. Replacement means it's not. So oftentimes they use the same curriculum, but the children in the replacement don't get as much of the curriculum or as in depth of the curriculum, or they make it through only half of the curriculum. So when they're saying to you that it's the same curriculum, they're not lying. They're using the same curriculum, but it's not the same. So I think it's just really important to ask a lot of questions so that you understand. Now, it may be appropriate for a child to be in a replacement curriculum in an area of severe deficit, that there's, very, very, they have a very strong learning disability in math, and that putting them in the general curriculum would not be appropriate at all, that they wouldn't be able to follow, and that the replacement curriculum can look at the skills that they need to build individually. So I'm not trying to say that that's like an inappropriate placement. Every child is different and their needs are different. I'm just saying that when you're talking about these skills, you've developed the goals. This is what we're looking for. What is the program and exactly what does it look like, so that the parent can understand, so that they can be an important part of the team. Because if you don't have the information, it's hard to, participate in the way you need to participate. Parents also have the right to observe proposed programs, including bringing independent professionals to observe the program, because For instance, let's say you have a 3 or 4-year-old with autism, and the district says that they have an appropriate autism program for your child, and they may have, okay? But you may not be the best person to be able to figure that out. You certainly can go look at the class, you can meet the teacher, you can observe before your child is sent to that, or before you agree for that placement. But you can also get an autism professional to go look at it and ask questions, because now that person has, more information about what your child is going to need in order to see. And that's before and after. So if your child is in a program and you're concerned that they're not making progress, you can bring in a professional to observe your child specifically and the program to help you understand whether it's an appropriate program for your child. Next slide. Okay, so we have the goals, we have the program, progress reporting, critical. Is the program working? Okay, so you need to have the baseline data, like where did the child start? That Judy spoke about that in the present levels information. Now you have the goals, and now you need data, right? How are we going to know if this is working? How's the school going to know? How's the parent going to know? So they should be collecting data, depending on the disability. It could be weekly, monthly, it could be daily. If it's an autism program, there should be a lot of data. You're entitled to see the data. You're entitled to, you're entitled actually to everything, all records of your child at the school district, and you can ask for that if you want to see what they have, because you're not necessarily getting everything sent home. They do progress monitoring at school, and they don't always share everything. And then we want to measure the progress. So there's, assessments, checklists, there's observations. There's there are, like, for certain reading programs, say Orton Gillingham or Wilson, there are different assessments, especially for the Wilson program, there are assessments built right into the program, and they should be providing those things with fidelity. And you want to make sure that they are going to be doing sufficient progress monitoring based on your child's disability to be able to understand. Again, it's not about like catching the district doing something wrong. Like, let's all assume that the district wants to have your child succeed also, that they want to provide services and have the child make progress, right? So, we just have to make sure that we get the data, the documentation, so we can all know, school district and parent, if in fact the child is making progress, and if not, we need to do something about it. And we don't have to wait for the yearly IEP meeting. If the child is not making progress and it's been 3-4 months, you can call another IEP meeting. You don't have to wait for the yearly meeting, and you can say that you have concerns that you don't see progress in certain areas that are the area of need. Let's say if it's a reading, if it's dyslexia, that you don't see the child being able to read with you at home, or bringing home leveled books that are much different than they did in September. So we need to figure it out, what's going on, and maybe either more or different services should be put in place right away. So yeah, so this is just an example of progress monitoring. Judy struggles with staying focused in class and completing her work on time. So we could have teacher checklists. They could be spot checks, let's say a week every month, where the teacher checks off how many of the tasks were completed on time or late. And then we can look at this data and see if it's moving in the right direction, if it's getting better, or if it's stagnant, or if it's getting worse. Next slide. We also need to talk about modifications, accommodations, and supplementary aids and services that the child is going to be provided in order to both access the curriculum and make progress. These are modifications and accommodations to the student's program in the general or special education classroom, and you'll see this as listed in your IEP. What are the difference between modifications and accommodations? So, an accommodation is, say, giving someone with slow processing speed more time to complete a task. That's an accommodation. The task is the same as the kids without a disability, but we're going to accommodate this child's disability by giving them more time. Or the child's in a wheelchair, they can't get up to the second floor. We need to accommodate the child by putting the classroom on the first floor or letting the child use the elevator. We're not changing the actual curriculum. We're just accommodating the child for their disability. A modification is actually changing the test or the curriculum. Like, you know, the gen ed kids are going to get a test with 5 multiple choice possible answers, and this child is going to have only 3 answers, or this child is going to have certain highlighted words, right? Now, you just want to be very careful with modifications because, again, we've seen parents come and their child has modified work, and then there's 3 years pass and the child is up for their triennial evaluations, and they're evaluated and they may have regressed or they haven't made any progress. And the parent is saying, they're coming home with A's. I don't understand how that's possible. And it's possible because they're modifying the work to the child's level so that the child can succeed. And I want to say that I'm not against that for the child's benefit where necessary. It's very upsetting to a child if they are given things they can't do and then they're getting F's, right? And they're trying really hard. That's not good. But if we're modifying the work, we can't use those grades on the modified work to say that the child has no needs, or the child's not, that, is or using that to show progress, because it's not based on what the other children are doing. So, you just want to be very careful, and you want it noted what the modifications are and whether the child needed them. Are there ways to do less and less modifications as long as the accommodations are good, and kids get accommodations in college, if they have slow processing, like I said, or ADHD, they may get extra time. There's all sorts of accommodations that are available throughout our lives. But once you're modifying things, that's really changing, they're not modifying the curriculum in a college class. You have to still do the curriculum. There's also lists of supplementary aids and services that are in the IEP that are very important: adaptive equipment, assistive technology, peer tutors, aids, audiobooks, large print, notes, things like that. Those should be listed, and those are all things that are going to help the student access their education and make progress in their education. Next slide. In addition, it's important to look at the supports that are going to be provided, both for the school or for the school personnel, the parents, and the student, right? So the teacher training, like if the child has an aide in an autism class in district, and the aide is the one that's going to be taking the data, the aide needs to be trained in how to properly take the data, because the BCBA that's going to be looking at the data has to be able to rely and have the same understanding of how the data was collected in order to be able to track progress. So it's very important that teacher and staff training, sometimes training or even, explaining to the teacher, say, auditory processing disorder and why the need for an FM system is so critical, and what that means, that a child may not be processing information. It's not that they're not paying attention, it's that they're literally processing it differently. And so that teacher and staff training is critical. There's also parent training, especially for some of the behavioral interventions, so that the parents can learn and understand how the child is being supported at school, and they can try to support the child at home consistently. And then there's student training, right? If the child is going to be given assistive technology, the child has to be trained on how to use that effectively. Next slide. Okay, so whenever the district proposes an action regarding the identification, classification, evaluation, placement of a student, a change of the IEP, they have to give prior written notice to the parent, okay? So this notice has to say what they're proposing, okay, and give the parents the opportunity to consider it before they do it. Okay, so, and they have to include, specific information so that the parents can consider this change. Next slide. Um, the law provides safeguards for when the parent disagrees. Let's say if you get notice that they want to add another speech therapy to your child's IEP, they feel they need more speech therapy. If you agree, then you agree. So no problem. So you can say you agree, they'll send you, they can even make those kinds of changes when everyone agrees. They can make them without having a meeting. If you agree, if you want a meeting, you can also ask for the meeting. And you can sign a new IEP and they can implement those changes. If you disagree with what they're asking to do, you can file for due process. And that's the way you sue your school district basically in education law. And when you file for due process, you can ask for mediation first, or else they'll do a resolution meeting. Mediation, we suggest because you get a mediator from the Department of Ed to help you resolve whatever's going on with the school district, whatever the disagreement is, whereas a resolution session is just really you meeting with the district on your own. Both sides have to agree to mediation, but in our experience, they usually do because, they want to resolve things too. They're not looking for every conflict to blow up into a trial. If things don't work out at the mediation, they send the file to the Office of Administrative Law, which is where these cases are heard at the first level, and you'll have a settlement conference with a judge. That's sort of another bite at the apple of mediating the solution, but with a judge, not the judge that would hear the case, a different judge, a settlement judge. But again, the judge is trying to bring the parties together and resolve whatever the conflict is. During this process, and I'm going to go over this in the next slide, you have stay put in the IEP that was already implemented. So without the change they're proposing. So signing the child's IEP, this is important because it's confusing to parents. So you must sign the first IEP your child ever has. Okay, so it's the initial IEP where they've classified the child and they're offering services. If you don't sign that IEP, they can't provide the services. However, after that first IEP, you don't have to sign all the rest of them. They just automatically go into effect at a certain time frame, right? So let's say you're in the middle of the year and they give you this notice that they want to move your child out of the general education into, from in-class resource to a pull-out replacement class, and you disagree. Okay. And they're giving you that notice in the middle of the year and they want to start that. They have to give you 15 days notice. They have to give you that notice in order to consider it and to act if you disagree. It's not enough to write a letter saying you disagree. It's not enough to just not sign the IEP. If they're planning on giving, if you're giving you that 15 days notice, you have those 15 days to file for due process. Once you file for due process, they can't move the child. They can't change the IEP until there's a resolution to the case. And that means, potentially going through a trial at the Office of Administrative Law. You can appeal the decision to the district court, federal court. You can appeal the district court to the Court of Appeals. You can appeal the Court of Appeals to the Supreme Court. And through the whole process of litigation, as long as you meet the timelines for filing, they can't move your child. It's a really, really important thing to understand because, they don't want to let anyone change or let at least the school district change the child's program and the parent disagrees. without a judge looking and saying whether or not they're right or not, right? Maybe they're just trying to move the child because the child's giving the teacher a hard time and and they're going to move them to this other thing. Maybe you agree that the general ed classroom isn't working, but you believe that another solution is the right solution and not what they're offering, right? For whatever reason, you file for due process, you have stay put. The thing that I would just want to make clear is if you have your IEP meeting, like let's say it's just the annual IEP meeting, it's not about changing something right away. Let's say you meet in May, but the IEP is really going to go into effect in September. You're meeting about next year's IEP. You have more than the 15 days in order to file for due process. You can file for due process just before the date that the IEP is going to be implemented in September. So, but this, the 15 days is really critical when they're trying to change something sort of right away, or they're saying, okay, the IEP is, going to expire on Friday. We have our IEP meeting on Thursday, and now they want to put the new one in effect immediately, right? So the critical thing is the effective day of the IEP, and just filing before the IEP goes into effect. If you file before the IEP goes into effect, then you can stay put the old IEP if you disagree with the new one. If you disagree with the new one, but you disagree with the old one, right? So the one you have now is not meeting the child's needs, and now the new one is not meeting the child's needs. You don't have to run to file for due process because you're trying to keep the old one in place because the old one isn't one that you think is working. This is most critical when they're trying to make a change that makes it what you believe makes it worse for your child, and you want to stop that from happening. I think I'm going back to you, Judy, right? For the next one? Yeah. Okay.
Right. Okay, so I just want to, we just have two more slides here, and I just want to emphasize, I'm going to talk about the implementation of the IEP, and I didn't get a chance to answer some of the questions in the chat, but I hope that this will address some of those questions. So the IEP, the reason why it's so important to get into the IEP specific goals, measurable goals, how the data is going to be collected to show progress, and what the parent concerns are is because the IEP is like a contract. I mean, it is a contract, and it's a contract between the family and the school district. And the school district saying, we recognize your child's needs. And if you disagree with that, you can put in the comments, in the parent comments, what you disagree about. And we're going to address those needs by providing A, B, and C, the program, okay, or the accommodations and the modifications and the supports. And we're going to assess whether this is successful by assessing your child's progress towards these very specific goals that are measurable. And we're going to use these types of assessment tools, whether it's observation that's recorded, that there's actual, a written graph or a chart, or there's specific assessments like written assessments, like a math assessment, or all these different types of measuring tools are specifically referred to in the IEP. This is the type of data that needs to be provided to you in order to demonstrate that this particular program is successful. If they don't have that data, they're not compliant, and it's required in the IEP. They're not in compliance with the IEP, and the law requires them to be in compliance with the IEP. If they're not complying with the IEP, they're in violation of the law. So that's why it's so important to develop a very robust and specific IEP, so that you can hold the district accountable if the program is not, if your child's not making progress. Because if your child's not making progress with the current program, then there needs to be changes made. And if your child hasn't made progress or has made minimal progress, and the district moving forward wants to remove some of the services and interventions, they have to demonstrate through the data, through the reporting, that your child has either mastered the goals and objectives that are in the IEP or has made meaningful progress. And it all comes back to what's in the IEP. And the IEP states we will measure or assess your child's progress by providing observations on a weekly basis. What Denise was talking about. Again, if they don't have the data, they don't have the evidence to demonstrate that the program is working. Now, the thing with the parental concerns also, it's very important that everything be in writing. So if you have specific parental concerns and they're in the IEP, it is the district's obligation to address those concerns. And they can do it in a number of ways. They can do it by responding to those concerns and saying, we are providing A, B, and C to address those concerns. Or if they don't recognize those concerns, they have to address that. They have to say that. And that's a matter that's always in it, that frequently is an issue. And but that doesn't mean you can't have an IEP that's being implemented. It just shows, it's evidence to show that the district, if it turns out that your concerns, your specific parental concerns of a certain disability that is not recognized by the district is accurate, and your child hasn't made progress or is still not making progress in their program because the district has failed to identify this disability, then that's on the district. They have not complied with their child find obligation to identify the child's disabilities and to address them. So that's why it's important to include in the parental concerns your concerns, your observations, your identification of what you think your child's needs are. Now, part of that, and I don't want to go off tangent too much, but part of that, it is important for the parent to express that. And the parent is an important party on the IEP team, an important member. But what really helps is if you get professionals to assess the child and to determine what those needs are. It really helps to have treating professionals or independent consultants that you have paid for to submit their analysis, to submit their assessment of the child and what they specifically recommend. And that also is included in the IEP. Independent assessments can be included in the PLAFs of what the pleasant level of performance is, of your child's performance and functional performance and academic performance. So it's very important to get everything. It's like a contract, to think of it as a contract, and you want to get everything into this document to hold the district accountable and obligated to address your child's needs in an effective manner. Now, as far as implementing the IEP, districts are large. They have a lot of kids in their classrooms. Making sure that your teacher knows that your child has an IEP is very important. Typically, there are several children in the classroom that have IEPs. Sometimes teachers just don't know the details of each. So you can give them a copy of your child's IEP, go over some of the specifics in it of what their responsibilities may be, or maybe there's an aide in the classroom, what their responsibilities may be, and what your child is struggling with, so that the teacher is aware. And work with your child's teacher. I think that's really, fundamental. I think we all try to do that for the most part. And ask if she needs help in implementing the IEP. Maybe she's a little frustrated because she's not getting support. Maybe she doesn't have the training. Maybe she notices that the one-to-one aide doesn't have the appropriate training. It's always good to build up a rapport with the people on the front lines, because they're your insight. They're your eyes of what's actually going on in the classroom. So if the teacher's starting to say, look, I need more help, or he or she, your child, needs specific types of remediation that I'm not able to give, or they need more intensive supports, that's very helpful. Or maybe the teacher said, you know what, this is a little bit of a too restrictive environment for your child. Maybe he needs or she needs to go back into the general ed program with specific supports and modifications. So this is all, under the purview of implementation of the IEP, building a rapport with the teacher and the people on the front lines. And then, of course, it's, just monitoring it, the fidelity that it's being implemented with fidelity, as Denise was talking about. And part of that is, communication with your child's teacher. Part of that is communication with your child. If your child is verbal, ask them questions. Are they receiving the services and modifications outlined in their IEP? If not, you got to talk to the school. You got to, in writing, write to the school, send an email to the case manager and says, my understanding is that my child's not receiving his OT services twice a week, or it was canceled this week, or I understand that the OT therapist was not around for 3 weeks. They were on maternity leave for 2 months. Whatever it may be, you need to communicate that in writing to the child study, to the IEP team, so that you can make sure that it's documented, because that documentation is basically demonstrating whether your child's being provided with the services they're guaranteed pursuant to the IEP, which again is a contract. And if they're not being provided, then the district's in violation of not only this contract, the IEP, but they're in violation of the law. So that's why it's so important to get those concerns in the parent section. That's why it's vital to get to make sure that the child's needs are explained with specificity. It's important to make sure that the goals and objectives are measurable, so that you can hold, not to help your child and hold the district accountable for this. You can make sure that you receive the progress reports, the generic progress reports that parents get. We hear complaints all the time from parents, and we review them, and they can be meaningless. That's why it's even more important to sometimes specify what kind of data you want collected that's supposed to be supporting what the progress reports are saying. And you have a right to access to that data and that accumulated information, along with the assessments that they're taking in order to monitor the progress of your child. So progress reports kind of say they're a little generic. Very little comes from them. What you want to see is, what's the data? What are the assessments that have been done? Let me look at them to see how my child is doing. That's really the information that will be helpful to demonstrate whether the program is successful or not, and monitoring what your child gets. Oh, I'm sorry. And then, volunteering at school, I don't know how many of us have the time to volunteer at school, but if you do, I guess it's always great to get inside your child's classroom or the school to just see what's going on and how things operate. And I think that's kind of it with, developing the relationships. And just so that you know that the IEP is the beginning, it's the contract, it's not the end of the process, and that you have to keep on top of it. You have to exert a lot of effort and time to make sure that that program is being implemented with fidelity, and that there is the evidence, the documentation that your child's making progress. And if that's not true, then you can reach out to the child study team and ask for a meeting and to go over what services are being provided or not being provided. And if they are being provided and they're not making progress, you can request changes to the IEP at any time during the year. You don't have to wait for the annual IEP meeting. So just the final words, which we always say at the end of every presentation because they're so important. Never under any circumstances tell the school that you just want what is best for your child. In special education, you are not guaranteed the best. You are guaranteed what is appropriate in order for your child to make meaningful progress. And that's a Supreme Court case that says that. So just keep in mind that you're always looking for appropriate services, appropriate education in order for your child to make meaningful progress toward their goals and objectives. Number two, put everything in writing. If you have a verbal conversation, you meet a teacher in the supermarket, or you bump into her at parent, back to school night, and they say something to you and you want to, and it's important information that's relevant to the IEP or to your child's progress, follow up with a confirmation email. If it's not, just say, oh, it was great seeing you. Thanks for the information. Thanks for letting me know that my child is doing better or doing worse, or whatever the reporting might have informed you of. And if it's not in writing, it was never said. If it's not in writing, it disappears. It just never happens. So any information that is not in writing doesn't exist and won't be helpful. You know, if you don't have it in writing, it's very difficult. So really try to document everything and everything. And then also finally, we try to, you know, it's very difficult sometimes with the school district. Sometimes you feel that it starts off in an adversarial manner. And it really, I mean, in general, school districts, the purpose, and especially the people on the front lines, like the teachers and the individual aides and the individual therapists, they really are trying to help your child, and they really do want your child to make progress. So we always find that it's very helpful to maintain a pleasant, cooperative, respectful manner when dealing with your child's school. You know, your child is there, and we believe that the kindness and respect goes a long way in getting what you want for your child. We find that in the years of experience in doing this, that really can be an incredibly effective way of getting your child what they need in order to make progress and and in order to develop a very robust, effective IEP. And with that, we didn't announce this at the beginning, and I know that there's been a number of questions in the chat, but we can answer some questions that have already been put in the chat. And if you have questions right now, please use the chat room. So I haven't.
Also, I think you can raise your, if you want to, I'm going to turn off the recording, first of all. Okay.